When I was a child, I developed a peculiar set of sleeping habits due to a reoccurring nightmare. The nightmare always began the same. Me and my cousin would be playing with Legos, laughing and remarking about each other's creations. Then we would hear a knock. A deep, awkward set of hits against wood, echoing throughout my room, would fill my head. I would pause, and suddenly I felt anxiety. It was a sixth sense of fear and excitement. Except I thought I had no reason to feel that way. It was just my mother, surely, respecting our privacy and asking for admittance into the room. I would call out, "Come in," and look to the door. It wouldn't open. Instead, the closest door would open, and a disfigured being resembling a man would race out and grab my cousin by the face. He would squeeze, and my cousin's brain and skull would shatter. Blood sprayed everywhere, and I stood speechless. I wouldn't even react. I just stared at what was left of my cousin. Then the same would be done with me. I would scream out for my mother, not to save me, but to protect herself. I would die before my voice would alert my mom. The last thing I'd see in the dream was a yellowed and wrinkly hand clenched in front of my eyes. This reoccurred for 2 weeks, each time resulting in waking up to clenched sheets and cold sweat. Soon, on the beginning of the 3rd week, I would find a way to fall asleep after my nightmare. I would grab my stuffed bear and let me dangle him over the edge of my bed, holding his arms tight. I would awake to find him fallen on the ground. It was a simple solution to my problem, and I quickly stopped having the nightmares and returned to normal sleep. I would feel reassured that I had a firm grasp on my bear, and it helped the anxiety dissipate. Today, now older and living on my own, I went through a couple boxes when I was clearing out my cluttered garage for space. There were a few old pictures I rummaged through, and I found one that must have been my parents taking a picture of me sleeping. The picture was from an older camera, before digital printing was a thing. Although my sides were yellow and torn, the quality was still surprisingly crisp. I noticed it was after I had the nightmares, so my hand was dangling over the edge. I smiled and was deep in thought for a moment, divulging myself in an old memory. I was about to toss the picture when I took one last look at the bear I was holding. Except there wasn't a bear I was holding on to. The bear was a few inches away from where my hand was. Instead of a happy, smiling bear that brought me warmth and joy, there was a different hand grasping mine. Instead of a fluffy brown bear hand, there was a yellow one, wrinkled and clenched. The wind had fooled us. Nice breeze, many had said. I had lived in a city where cool weather such as wind was uncommon. Because of this, most were rather accepting of it. Nobody took any sort of caution or notice as the wind began to make itself at home, making its light conditions more and more apparent. It had corrupted the city with its calm, relieving charm, turning its unfamiliar touch into a welcomed pleasure. Once it had taken hold of the land, it had begun to take its real form. The wind had irritated us. The usual days of breeze had turned itself into constant pest. It would always blow objects over and carry away personal belongings with a tight tug. It was nothing dangerous or harmful, but there were moments when many began to question its place, becoming more of an unwelcome visitor. We hadn't seen calm, windless weather in a good number of weeks, which started to make some worry that we were going through a form of climate change. Those who studied the wind's accumulation urged everyone not to worry, that this was most likely a series of small storms that will pass soon. We should have left there. I should have left even sooner. The wind had controlled us. The gentle breezes had disappeared. What was left of the winds were its constant, powerful gales. I saw this when some decided to try and leave the city. Something about it all had seemed unnatural. The gusts and gales seemed too consistent, as if it were more of a conscious spirit than just heavy, chaotic weather. When everyone was indoors, safe from its forces, it seemed to calm down, sometimes going back to what appeared normal. The moment when one would try get out of town, the wind had returned, with power great enough to sometimes blow vehicles off the road. This kept many in fear. Weather channels and reporters urged everyone to stay in shelter, as it was beginning to look more like a hurricane of sorts. It still didn't seem right, even for a severe storm. The wind had scared us. The fear of the wind began with the experience of one man. He had weighed his car down, confident that it could resist the forces of the wind and make it out of the city safely. When all seemed to be calm, not a single breeze in the air, he ran for his vehicle. Before he could even reach the door, the wind had returned. It didn't blow him away. It more so began to cut his skin, as if one had dragged lines of blades across his arms, legs, and face. He managed to make it back indoors before his injuries got too serious. This was mentioned on the final news broadcast in the city, and then we had lost power. I got a message on the phone saying that rescue teams were on the way, that we would be saved soon as long as we stayed indoors. I wish that had been true. The wind had mutilated us. My mind and memory are scarred. I had nightmares from what I saw the next few days. I wasn't even sure if I could call it wind anymore. Many ran outside, believing it had vanished, only for it to return when they were left defenseless. It cut them to the bone. The wind didn't immediately disintegrate its victims, but instead killed them slowly. I watched as others attempted to run to shelter as their clothes, then skin, then muscle were stripped away from them for as long as a minute. Every last piece of flesh was ripped from their bones until nothing was left but a bloodied, dark red skeleton. I couldn't bear to watch their suffering anymore. I boarded my windows at that point, but I still heard the screams that would come and go at intervals for days and nights. The wind had destroyed us. I had resorted to hiding, occasionally peeking outside through a slit in my boarded windows. I don't know if there were any others left in the city to look for. After others finally stopped trying to run, the wind had started to look for us. This sounds crazy, but I actually felt that it was a sort of living being at that point. It began to make its way into homes and buildings. It would find one looking outside into the calm streets, and then it would move in, shattering the windows and cutting its victims like a knife. Since I had stopped looking out my windows, I don't think it ever saw me. but the screams of others had gone silent. The wind had left us. I had run out of options. I was running out of water and food, and wasn't sure if rescue was coming at all, or if it had been destroyed a while ago. I decided I was going to just step outside and let the forces of the wind take me, as death was going to be eventual. As I opened my door, I stepped outside. I was greeted with an alarming calmness. Outside was silent, and I didn't feel so much a breeze on my skin. I wasn't sure if the forces were toying with me or not, so I walked the ruined streets for a while. The streets were lined with broken glass, toppled cars, and scraped bones and skulls. There were sections of walls that were completely painted with blood, almost in an organized manner. After almost an hour of no activity, no signs that the winds were still there, it seemed to me that it had vanished. It had assailed the city completely, only to leave after I heard everyone silenced. Crazy as it may be, I have only one speculation as to what could have transpired. The wind was, in some strange, twisted way, something living. It had come to my city with only the intent to massacre, and had killed off every individual it could find. It never found me, so I suppose that makes me the lone survivor. I'm not joyful though. I'm terrified, more so than before. All because of a single question. If this is a living creature, and it's finished its desires here, where has it gone now? It was the 2nd of January, 2:04 a.m. I woke up to a knocking on the door. One knock every 3 seconds. I slipped on my slippers and walked down the stairs. As I walked down, the knocking on the door got faster, almost like a heartbeat. When I got to the door, the knocking stopped. I looked outside, and nobody was there. I went back up to my room and went back to bed, thinking it was just some kids playing a prank. At 4:21 a.m, I woke up to the front door slamming shut. I jumped, terrified. I looked over at my frosted window to find "Smile" written all over it in the frost. I grabbed my phone next to me, ready to call 911, only to find a message written on it saying, "I told you to smile." I cried and ran for my life, running outside. As soon as I got outside, I knocked on my neighbor's house across the road. They answered and held me while I sobbed. They phoned the police. At exactly 5:42, the police came to my neighbor's house after an extensive search of my house. They told me there had been no evidence at all of anyone in my house other than me. The messages on the window were gone, same with my phone. They told me to get some sleep and advised me to see the doctor about stress and anxiety problems. Screw that. I knew what happened to me was real. The following evening, after spending the day at my neighbor's, I went home. I went up to my bedroom and set up a camera. It was aimed at my bedroom door and my bed. I set it to record and went to sleep. Thankfully, I slept through the night. However, as I watched the footage, I couldn't believe what I saw. At 3 in the morning, something crawled out from under my bed. It was a completely naked, anorexic man. He stood up and looked at me on the bed. He did so for another hour, not moving at all. Then he moved. He walked over to the camera until his face took up the whole shot. He was extremely pale and had bulging veins all over his head. His eyes were completely black with a huge smile on his face. He stared at the camera for another 2 hours, not blinking, just slightly twisting his head every now and again. After 2 hours of him staring went past, he walked back over to my bed and crawled back under. I skipped the video forward until it showed me getting up and walking over to the camera. The video finished. I was frozen with fear. The video showed him going back under, but not leaving. Whatever it was still there. This was Peter's favourite time of year, late fall. Almost all the leaves had fallen from the trees, and the crisp, cool temperatures made for almost perfect weather for him. Peter was a mailman in a somewhat affluent suburb of the city, doing one of the few remaining runs that still had delivery door to door. He would start at one end of the neighbourhood, and at a good work rate, would be able to complete his deliveries before 2 in the afternoon. He enjoyed his work and tried to keep a quick pace, both for the health benefit it provided and to be able to finish his day early. He never saw many people on his run. Those he came across would make like he wasn't there, a part of the background, if you will. Peter didn't mind much. He would just smile after trying to make some eye contact, then continue on his way. It was early one morning, a little bit into his route, when he came across a little boy sitting on the steps of an older house. He may have delivered here 100 times already, if not more. Rarely did he see anyone around that place, but from his vague memory, he recalls he may have come across this boy once or twice. This time seemed different, like he was almost waiting for him. He was no more than 10, a bit pale, with sandy blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and almost no expression on his face. He never took his eyes off Peter as he sat there on the steps, waiting for the mailman to make his delivery. Peter thrust a letter into the boy's outstretched hand and gave him a smile. He continued on his way, oblivious to the boy's eyes as they followed him down the street. The next day was similar, only the boy was at a house further up the street, earlier on his run. Peter went through the motions, putting the envelopes in the boy's hand, and walked towards the next house. Although he knew that the boy probably didn't live at the house he found him at, he almost felt compelled to hand him the mail. Every day their little game continued, and every day the boy was waiting at a house further and further up the street. Peter would spot the boy from a distance, and sure enough, there would always be a delivery for the house where the boy sat. There were never any words exchanged between them, but a general uneasiness on Peter's part started to become quite evident every time he approached the steps where the lad sat. Peter started being very anxious about this part of his job. He felt a sense of dread as he would approach the boy, and almost be frightened in his presence. Peter could feel that something just wasn't right with the whole situation. The next day started like any other, but as he made his way towards the boys' street, he realized that the object of his angst would probably be at the first house on the block, due to him moving up the street a few houses each day. He turned the corner and was greeted with a makeshift memorial right on the curve. Propped up on the lamppost were flowers, crosses, little stuffed animals, and a few toys. Warily, Peter looked over to the first house, almost shaking. The memorial is for the boy. It must be for the boy, Peter thought. He looked over to the house, half expecting not to see him. The boy, however, was there, sitting on the steps, waiting for him. The scene seemed even scarier this time, given Peter's revelation. The boy was looking down at his own feet this time, a few tears visible on his pale cheeks. The mailman reluctantly approached him with his usual letters and put them in his hands. "Do you know what happened here?" Peter asked the boy. The little boy looked up and nodded, more tears streaming down his cheeks. He pointed to the memorial at the foot of the lamppost, and then upwards to a paper taped about eye level that Peter didn't notice. Even though he couldn't read the words where he was, he knew what the newspaper clipping said. "That's about you, isn't it?" Peter asked, his voice almost breaking. He couldn't believe he was speaking with a child who had died tragically at this spot. "No," the boy answered, almost in a whimper. "It's about both of us." Peter put his head in his hands and sobbed uncontrollably. The memories of the accident came flooding back. The car careening out of control, him trying to push the boy out of the way, the hit and run that disastrously took both their lives. "What's your name?" Peter asked as he tried to compose himself with this new truth. "Michael," said the boy in a bit of a stronger voice than before. "Well, Michael, I think I can finish early today," Peter told him. He put his mailbag down onto the manicured lawn and started walking down the street, leaving the makeshift memorial on the corner behind them. Michael got off of the steps and followed.